Vă rog foarte mult să vă ocupați locurile în sală, pentru că în scurt timp începem, în mai puțin de 2 minute. Mulțumesc! Să luați loc, stimații noștri paneliști, alături de domnul ministru, aici în față. Mulțumesc! Please join. Yes, it's okay. It's up to you. Bună ziua! Bună ziua tuturor participanților la următoarea zi, a doua zi a conferinței Combaterea sărăciei energetice în Europa, provocări, lecții învățate și căi de urmat, exemplul Moldovei.
Lessons learned and ways to follow Moldova's example. This is organized by the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection under the aegis of Government of Moldova with the support of UNDP. As we mentioned, we are on the second day of the event, and we will discuss in the third panel lessons learned from the crisis. When it comes to the approach of tackling energy vulnerability and poverty and path to follow, we have here government representatives, MPs, donors, and development partners. My name is Lilia Kurk, and I am the moderator of today's panel. And I'm honored to introduce to you the panelists with whom we'll discuss today for the next 2 hours. I'm honored to welcome Alexei Buzu, Minister of Labour and Social Protection of the Republic of Moldova. Also, Mr. Marcel Spatari, he is an expert for the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection. Ex-Minister Daniela Gashparikova, she's resident representative of UNDP in Moldova. And online with us will be Ion Munteanu. He is the director of the Energy Efficiency Agency of the Republic of Moldova. With me, close to me, is Michael Curtis. He is expert in the energy sector from USAID Moldova. And also, I have Alexandru Sandulescu, High Advisor of the EU in the area of energy in Moldova. And online we have the European Observer of Energy Poverty. Well, thank you for being with us today at this discussion, which will give us the following perspective and the lessons learned from the energy crisis. According to a UNDP crisis, more than 60% of the households of Moldova are affected by energy poverty. The compensations for energy provided last year have reduced this level to 43%. And they have had the highest impact for vulnerable families, because these ones had more than 80% of their, actually 83% of their bill compensated by the government, bill for natural gas. Let me start with the lessons that you had to learn, because it's not just Moldova who had to face the energy crisis generated by the Russia's war in Ukraine. Mr. Sandulescu, could you share from the lessons learned? Because yesterday we talked about the way we overcame and what lessons could be drawn today about the lessons learned from the energy crisis, the experience while tackling energy poverty from the EU, from the neighboring countries. How could we apply these lessons learned for the further development, for future strategies, for policies, for the next generation, which should tackle energy security and energy poverty so that we don't have such impacts in the future? Just take the microphone, sir, and you have the floor. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this conference. This was a difficult time, starting with October 2021. Moldova has also been affected strongly by the regional developments, and specifically this energy crisis has affected the whole Europe, but also the vulnerable population of the society. We have lessons learned, lessons which could be useful for us in the next winter. The first lesson learned was the fact that the energy prices on the markets are very volatile. They are very responsive to a crisis, and of course they are increasing. And then the EU allowed EU member states to take measures in order to protect the consumers and vulnerable industries. I mean, the industries which have been affected the most by the spikes in energy prices. Such measures have been taken in Moldova as well. And here I'd like to tell you that Moldova chose, I guess, the best system of protecting vulnerable consumers, because if in other countries, EU member states, they have capped the markets on the retail markets and on gross markets. I'm talking about heating and electricity. Well, Moldova actually chose another path. It left the prices free on the market, and it compensated directly the bill for some of the costs related to the spikes in energy prices. Well, by doing that, Moldova was able to offer a differentiated support subject to the degree of vulnerability of each and every category of consumers. We talked yesterday about this distribution in vulnerability categories. So the support was somehow very well tailored to the level of vulnerability of every citizen. Of course, this system wasn't built immediately. You know, in the first winter, 2021, 2022, the system was non-differentiated, but there is a lesson learned here as well. I mean, the promptness with which Moldova was able to implement such a system is very important, The system has one disadvantage, if I could say so, that the price on the retail market for electricity and gas has and is still a market price, one which is in line with, takes care of the cost of these products and the price established on international markets for gas and electricity, while other countries, member states of the EU, they have capped the price for consumers. So, through one simple comparison between the prices from Moldova for final consumers and the prices from other countries for final consumers, the picture is that, well, in Moldova, prices are the highest in Europe. We saw such articles in the press. The reality is different. The prices are market prices, uncapped, but consumers pay much less. Consumers, vulnerable ones, they pay much less for the bill. And there were other lessons learned as well. And namely, even though the European Union was very dependent on natural gas imports, they were able to avoid a collapse in this area. They were able to reduce the consumption of natural gas. They were able to identify alternative sources of natural gas, including through LNG terminals. And here also you can see in this relatively quick change of sources and routes of supply, Moldova can set an example, because at last one can see the benefits of investments made in the past in diversification of supply routes with natural gas, and why not with electricity. And here we received help from EU when we've done the 16 March synchronization with NSOE. Well, you can again see articles from the past. Why do we need the Ashungen gas pipeline? Now they have found the answer for these questions as well. So somehow Moldova has been well prepared for a transition to use natural gas from a single supplier and a unique route of supply towards a diversified supply for the European market, a competitive market of natural gas. Well, of course, there could be other items to discuss, but maybe later. Thank you. Sure, we'll get back to seek details from you. You have highlighted important aspects, and what I was able to notice in my activity of journalist is the way we reflected previously the investments made in other municipalities, and we see this winter how they function. Well, let us now discuss how do we cover the vulnerable groups so that they would go post this energy poverty, because they are the most affected. And the question goes to Mr. Spatar, who is an expert in this area, an expert for the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. Ex-Minister Mr. Spatar, now looking in the future, with lessons learned, what strategies or what actions which have been implemented could be developed or adjusted to help vulnerable groups, to help low-income households, to help marginalized communities so that they are not left behind in this process of an effort of fighting energy poverty. What do you think about it as an expert?
Mulțumesc. Eu aș vrea, înainte de a
Before
vă spune care este viziunea
telling you what's my take on the future of this fund, of this mechanism, let me underline some conceptual points which were at the foundation of this system of compensation last year. Let me answer the question: why do we call it Energy Vulnerability Fund and why not Energy Poverty Fund? Because yesterday we talked a lot about energy poverty. We had a presentation about an international methodology for measuring energy poverty, but still our fund is not called Energy Poverty Fund. It is called Energy Vulnerability Fund. Well, it is precisely because energy poverty is a phenomenon which does not depend upon the market. The methods of 10%, of median, and you saw the weights. Well, these people are vulnerable in any context. Last year, and in the last 2 years, the market context made it so that more people were thrown into energy poverty, but they were not under the risk of energy poverty in the past. So we thought that this concept of vulnerability should be explored and introduced into a discussion. Well, those who looked specifically into the mechanism which is at the basis of classification and various degrees of vulnerability, they did not understand why 80% of those who registered into the system, they fell into the maximum category of vulnerability, very high vulnerability. This is because the market context was such that more than 80% of the households would have spent the whole household budget if it were not for the compensations. Now, in this regard, and in that context, the cost of energy would exceed the household budget for 80% of the people. So high was the energy price. So given that the family must cover these main basic expenditures, the model takes into account the budget for a basic basket. So in November, 80%, and then we've introduced certain filters so that abuse would be avoided, and the percentage fell to 75, but still it's high. Subject to prices, the distribution of households between vulnerability categories will change, and probably if prices will be small this year, we will have another addition by categories of vulnerability. So the profiling of households is done for every cold season, subject to the market situation. And here we have to do with another phenomenon which is linked to the development of energy markets from Europe, and I mean here price volatility. Energy is a market where the prices are very volatile, specifically day price. We don't get into the technicalities of it. It's sometimes on this market you could have negative prices. Well, if there is too much wind in Germany, then it could be days when the prices are minus. You saw last year, at a certain point in time, or a couple of years ago actually, the price of petrol was negative. So there are, well, look, this is how energy market functions. There are risks that people with low income or average income or the middle class, they should be able to mitigate those and avoid them. Well, this mechanism is a mechanism of compensations that we've introduced through the Energy Vulnerability Fund. This is a buffer, if you want. Mr. Dolescu, you want to intervene? It's a very lively discussion. It's a buffer which allows the family to plan expenditures for the cold season. We have seen that during the winter, the last winter, the price for heat grew, and if it weren't for the compensation system as it is provided, the consumers would have paid that surge in full. It is absorbed by the compensation, and the consumers had the same bills, even though the price for heat increased.
The mechanism allowed us to avoid the volatility in energy prices. Of course, there were costs for the budget, and here we are coming to the discussion about sustainability. We said it yesterday. This mechanism is quite expensive. 1.2% of the GDP and 3% of the Energy Vulnerability Reduction Fund. It is quite difficult to fund such a mechanism without the assistance of foreign partners, or without redirecting funds from other ministries. You have to distribute everything correctly, efficiently, and everything has to be fair. And more than 60% of the citizens have said that this system is fair, and that's good, but we need to preserve this perception of the system being fair. And I know that the ministry is working on even better targeting. There is a legal initiative, as far as I know, to add 2 vulnerability categories. Instead of 5 that we have now, we are going to have a different number of categories next winter. And we need to think about the previous instruments that we had to counter energy poverty. All these need to be integrated on the same platform. And we've seen yesterday the projects of the Ministry of Energy, the Energy Efficiency Fund, for example, which needs to be correlated to our policies in reduction of vulnerability and energy poverty. This must be a concerted effort. And I'm very happy for the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. There is very good cooperation. And we have seen this in the case of the Energy Vulnerability Reduction Fund. There were vouchers for the household appliances and other things. The authorities will certainly keep up the good work in making the use of the fund more efficient. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Spadar has mentioned the new elements that are going to be added, 2 more categories of vulnerability, and the synergy between the ministries and the authorities, the vouchers, the other kind of support that could be provided to the citizens. You know, I liked this emphasis of the fact that we could use this money for some other needs of the citizens of the Republic of Moldova. So basically that means emphasis on energy efficiency, which would compensate for the losses of energy and would help families be much more resilient to the energy shocks. Now I would like to ask Daniela Gashparikova. At European level, we have the strategy of equal access or safe energy for all citizens. Now, which policies, in your view, could be added in the portfolio of options of the Republic of Moldova based on the lessons learned? Well, what would be needed to tackle the energy poverty at national level?
Thank you very much for having the opportunity to join the panel and in this conversation. On reflection of the experience of the Republic of Moldova, but also the other countries, there are a few points that stand out. I think the first one is that there is no one silver bullet. I think that that's the biggest lesson learned. And while we may have seen some of the reactive reactions at the beginning of the crisis, for example, switching back on the coal power plants as a way to mitigate the impact. I'm very pleased to have seen across the number of the countries that this was just hopefully short-lived, and that there is a realization that in the times of the crisis, while we focus on mitigating the short-term impacts, we shouldn't lose the sight of the medium to long-term interventions. And I think that that's where the collaboration between the Ministry of Social Protection and Labour and the Ministry of Energy is very important. So it takes the multidisciplinary teams and it takes the interventions in the multitude of the sectors. Second, when we talk about the policies, let me highlight that it was mentioned yesterday, but I think the governance, so the policies and the interventions that ensure the transparency, accountability, and I think it goes back to the building of the trust of the citizens on the interventions and the systems that are being put in place, so that trust is built through the strong governance mechanisms that gives assurances to all the stakeholders who are contributing not only financially, but also to those who are benefiting as the clients, that what is being put in place can be measured, it can be looked into, it can be assessed, it can be questioned in a positive, constructive manner, with the intention to improve in going forward. The third lesson learned, and I think that what we have seen also in Moldova is the importance of data and for the policy decision making, and what those data can do if they come from different places, so be it public or private sector, and if one applies digital tools. So I think that this is in the combination of the data, the evidence, and that was not only in the case of the Energy Vulnerability Reduction Fund, but that is a lesson learned, that having the good information, timely information, having for different types of stakeholders access to that information to provide the different insights and the collaboration of those is something that we could do more of in different areas and different sectors. The last but not least, I think that what we shouldn't lose the sight of is perhaps the quadruple benefits of in going forward from this experience. And that one, the first one is that yes, on the energy sector, we talk about the mechanics, technologies, right, the technological solutions to how to leapfrog, right, and how to apply the technologies. That is very, very important. However, the key question is how this leapfrogging takes everybody with you, not only in terms of leaving no one behind, but also how it creates the new opportunities for the jobs, different types of jobs, for those who may be vulnerable today, but in the going forward can actually benefit from this technological leapfrogging. The third point is, and the win that I see, is with every individual and citizen and company or an organization being an active participant in the energy market. And this is where the solutions, and in going forward with each of us becoming so-called prosumer, producer of the energy, but also the consumer and decision maker in the energy market on the consumption, on the technologies, on managing basically the load, if you want, in the energy sector. But also through this participation, again, further providing the insights as to where we want to go in the future. And all of this then combined is, are the tracks and the pathways to not only reducing energy, but the discussion on vulnerability is important, because with the Energy Vulnerability Fund, it prevented at a critical moment the massive slide back into the poverty for the large proportion of the population. How we can work together in going forward that we not only prevent the slide back, but we eliminate that vulnerability, in a more sustained way. So I think that all of this together is very important, and that's why I do not necessarily view the vulnerability fund and the on-bill compensations as an expenditure, and that's the last point that I want to leave you with. In my view, it's an investment. It's an investment in the future, in allowing those who benefit, to come out of the crisis with dignity and to come out of the crisis with being in charge in making decisions over the future, because we know that this is investment in education which deteriorates when the energy comfort and access to energy services is not there. Health, which again deteriorates. So this is investment into prevention, in worsening on education, on health status, on the quality of the life of the nearly 80% of the households in Moldova. Thank you.
Mulțumesc foarte mult. Un accent de
Thank you very much. The emphasis on education. Unfortunately, we didn't know how to save. There was no need to do that. But based on the experience and interaction with the experts in the area, we heard about energy poverty. We heard about energy maintenance in our buildings, about acquisition of technologies that would consume fewer energy. And I see here in the room the experts who can confirm this. But how does this lack of awareness at a higher level has actually made us vulnerable in this energy crisis? Now I would like to involve Mr. Ion Munteanu, who is the director of the Energy Efficiency Agency. Mr. Munteanu, kindly tell us, from the point of view of energy efficiency and from the point of view of your institution, what are the lessons learned? How can we go on applying the best lessons that we have learned in this crisis? Hello, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate. Thank you to the organizers and the team in the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. We must also thank the development partners who were by Moldova's side during the energy crisis. And each consumer in the Republic of Moldova has felt it in their bills. And we need to implement the subventions for the energy efficiency. The money that we have previously used for the compensations should be targeting other areas. The first lesson of the crisis was to provide mechanisms that would make energy consumption more efficient, would reduce the bills, and would make the consumption more efficient. And this was targeting first and foremost the vulnerable communities. Now we are quite advanced in some of these mechanisms. I would like to briefly mention the Energy Efficiency Fund for the residential sector, the Green Home, Casa Verde, which will need to be implemented in the nearest future, and the program of vouchers. Let me talk a bit about the program of vouchers. It's focused on the resources and capacities of the infosystem for I personally was very happy to hear the idea of the ex-minister Spadar when he presented the concept. And when I was in the UNDP, we were talking about the potential of making a difference between various beneficiaries of vouchers. The first thing that we took into account was the fairness. Yes, we understand the limitations of the system at this point. And we do understand that this kind of a system will actually allow us to target people who are vulnerable from the point of view of energy. And they are part of different categories. There's one more important thing. We should allow the development partners and funding institutions have an instrument that would allow them to identify the potential targeted beneficiaries so that we would allocate funds the way they think they should be allocated. And there is another thing. We shall be able to manage quite large numbers of funds. And I would like to say a few words about this energy efficiency fund for the residential sector. You see, we are now the candidate country for the EU and a member of the energy community, so we have quite ambitious commitments in the energy sector, particularly when it comes to residential buildings. This requires tens of billions of investments every year. We understand that the classic approaches in terms of identification of projects and their promotion are just not relevant now, because we need digital instruments that will allow us to make correct decisions. And implement projects that would have an impact on the consumers of the Republic of Moldova, including the most vulnerable ones. We are now working at different programs that would allow us to train different parties involved in the implementation of the fund. I mean here energy auditors, different companies that will be doing construction works, engineering designs. We have the experience of other lessons learned, so it is important to lay emphasis on quality and sustainability. That is why we need to provide trainings which ultimately will ensure a high level of more responsible use of public money. And coming back to this Casa Verde program, we have some interesting lessons in this sense. Very often the households prefer to invest in solar panels. And often we see that this is not possible because the roof is in bad condition. And And there are families where there are poor families where there are lots of children and they cannot install a solar collector to get hot water in house because there is no sewage system or sanitation system available. So we need a cooperation here. We need policies that would involve Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, Ministry of Regional Development as well. Another important aspect is the quality of data. Madam Gasparikova has managed that. It is important to have quality data. And I will give you the example of the things that we are doing at the agency. The crisis had a significant impact on residential consumers. It stimulated them to install photovoltaic systems. We see that within 5 months of 2023, the number of households that have installed a photovoltaic system went up by 71% compared to the situation at the end of 2022. This is something that makes us happy because many households manage to find solutions that help them reduce the energy bill. But having this information and monitoring it, we see some risks and other issues related to the network or grid capacity. Sometimes the number of those who want to install the photovoltaic systems is so large that not everyone can benefit from this. So we need to develop sectoral or intersectorial policies that would help us reach this goal.
We'll get back to you, Mr. Munteanu, as we progress. Just stay online, please. We will continue our discussions here in the room. The Energy Efficiency Director talked about the residential area and how can we help them decrease energy vulnerability, and we heard about the importance of technologies investments in equipment which should be more energy efficient. Now, the importance of building houses and apartment blocks which are energy efficient, but I'll also add here the importance of making those already built more energy efficient. I'd be curious to know if USAID in Moldova is prioritizing some strategies, support policies in order to provide help to citizens and government institutions for us to be able to go through this energy crisis. Mr. Michael, you have the floor.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I, first of all, want to thank the organizers, the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, UNDP, for putting on this really important conference. And I'm finding it very interesting listening to the panelists here because in our thinking about what our strategic approaches are on addressing energy poverty, energy security, and clean energy, I find a lot of synergy in what I'm hearing today. If I could kind of step back at a higher level, if that's okay. At USAID, we really see three broad objectives in terms of addressing energy for Moldova. First is energy security. So, you know, we all understand the circumstances here in Moldova and the malign actors who want to use energy as blackmail and to influence the change in Moldova. We know that there is a focus on affordable energy, what we've been talking about here. It's very important. How do you get to a sustainable future with affordable energy for all? And then third is clean energy. The Ministry of Energy, the President on down, emphasizes the role of renewable energy and energy efficiency. So in the grouping of clean energy, we pick up the focus on energy efficiency as well as renewable energy. So Moldova is endowed with tremendous renewable energy resources throughout the country, particularly in wind and solar. There is enormous opportunity to improve the energy efficiencies in the built environment here. So when we think about the priorities for the energy sector in Moldova, it's important to think about these three priorities: security, affordability, and security. So that's what I'd like to make a few remarks about, if I could. First of all, let me say that the U.S. government, USAID in particular, has a long history of working in Moldova, and I've been here for more than 3 decades. So we've been at this work for a long time, and we continue to work in strong partnerships with the government of Moldova. We have a very robust energy program here totaling about $389 million of new funds for energy sector that addresses all three of these priorities of security, affordability, and security. So as I listen to the other panelists make remarks, I find a great deal of complementarity of what we're prioritizing in our program with that of the other speakers today. And I'd like to suggest perhaps a framework for thinking about how to address these three priorities of security, affordability, and security. Clean energy, clean energy, security, and affordability. What is a framework for addressing about these three priorities? And I want to propose to think about these kind of broad areas, if I could. And the first is a transition to help Moldova have greater integration with the European markets. There has been tremendous work done over the past 12 months as far as helping the government move to this integration with the European energy grid, NSOE, as well as starting to work with the European gas markets on supply of natural gas. So that critically important for addressing a secure energy future is one that is fully integrated with the European markets. Essential towards that integration is building and strengthening the institutions of government in Moldova. So these institutions, as I call them, are not just organizations, but they include items like rule of law, legislation, regulation, being able to have the planning capacity, etc. So we have been working and providing a lot of support to the major energy organizations within the government of Moldova. For example, we've been working with the Ministry of Energy on its efforts to reform the policies, legislation, integrating, transposing the European regulations into Moldovan laws, helping them move that process forward to be able to facilitate this quick accession to the EU and integration with the European markets. We're working with Moldova quite extensively who is a critical player in the energy sector to build its capacity to operate its system, to improve the resiliency of the transmission system, and to meet all of the technical standards that are necessary for this integration with the European grid. We're working with Energocom, who is a major market buyer of energy, and helping them to build their capabilities so that it can purchase natural gas, electricity on commercial markets that we've heard a lot about earlier. That open competitive market so that today Energocom is able to buy natural gas, for example, at prices at historical low levels, our assistance has helped them to be able to do that. So today, Energocom is getting well positioned for the future winter months with natural gas storage, which is really a remarkable change over the past 12 months. The third organization that we've been assisting is the regulator, or ONRE, who is helping them to implement important European standards and regulations for compliance and to advance market reforms to help bring in more competitive prices for energy. We're actually working with them to strengthen their capacity, to increase options for energy supply, and to enable more opportunities for energy trade. So that's the institutional side of things, the integration with the European markets. There's also the technology deployment side of things to help on this integration. So my colleagues have mentioned earlier here about the need for technological change, and certainly that's the case. So being able to integrate into the European markets, you have to have the kinds of technologies to be able to do that. So many donors, several donors, including USAID, is funding new grid connections with the European markets to help to bring in more electricity during those months, so we can move, so the government can move away from buying electricity on the spot market at very high prices. So helping to increase the security, so you have more ways to bring in electricity into the Moldova system. We're also helping Moldoelectrica in its training, planning software, helping them build the IT capabilities, the cybersecurity infrastructure, so that they can operate more in a digital area. And finally, in terms of the transmission system itself, the technologies are needed to improve the flexibility and resiliency of the grid to meet the balancing needs of supply and demand balancing. So this is a weakness in the current system, and Moldoelectrica, we are helping them to increase the balancing services so that they can bring in a more stable, secure grid, as well as in the future bring in more renewable energy resources. So the third area, that's the second area is the technology. I'd say the third area is in terms of the immediate response, the emergency response conditions. So in that regard, we talk about the Vulnerability Fund to deal with the emergency immediate costs for high electricity. The U.S. government has provided $110 million in direct budget support to help offset the cost of high electrical prices from buying on the European markets. We are also, as I mentioned earlier, helping the government to store gas reserves when the prices are very low right now, to help them store it for the upcoming winter months, so we don't run into the same crisis that was happening last year when they had to buy gas at very high prices. We're helping to provide emergency generators to critical institutions such as hospitals and government facilities so that they can continue to work. So I just wanted to lay out this sort of a broad framework, if you will, to think about how we can address these needs of security, affordability, and clean energy future. So thank you very much.
Mulțumesc foarte mult. Mulțumesc că
Thank you, sir. Well, we are talking about the crucial aspects related to the cooperation between actors. Now, cooperation which would help us improve things, which will help us reorient through targeted fair investments, improve the systems, and reorient, rechannel the money which we have towards other social needs in this country. Now, I know that besides the governments, citizens, there are still, look, the results or the actions at the local level are very important. At the European level, we have one institution which tracks the way local public authorities are tackling. What are the examples from different municipalities? It would be interesting to find out from Mr. Epe Ensen. He is the European Observer of Energy Poverty. How can we choose the best lessons, the best paths to follow, given the impact? When we know that you measure in your institution the impact of various active measures. Now, based on this impact, how can we prioritize? How can we choose the best ways? And what examples, what beautiful examples, what beautiful lessons can we take from Europe, from local public authorities, for instance, from the town halls?
For the introduction here, Mr. Moderator, it's tricky. It's a tricky question you're posing here, and I think it's already been said once. There is no such thing as a silver bullet, and I think that goes for national level as well as local level. And I think what the fossil fuel crisis have shown us is first and foremost that energy poverty is here. All decision makers, from local to international level, have been forced to put this on the agenda. And this goes in all EU member states and beyond as well. And regardless of existing situations, we can see that the fossil fuel crisis has shown that the segments that previously have been considered vulnerable, of course, were hit very hard. But at the same time, the most vulnerable quintiles in society have very often already been part of support schemes, whereas when the crisis hit the vulnerable consumers,
all of them entered into the broader middle class, and that's when the number of affected households are increasing exponentially. So all of a sudden it becomes a very mainstream challenge and not something that previously has been more niche. Putting this on the agenda also has shown a series of gaps. As here we talked about previously, the lack of energy literacy. When there is an abundance of energy, we may not focus so much on the efficiency.
But the crisis has surely shown that there has been a need for a much better understanding of the phenomenon. This means there has been a lot of very lively discussions going on about defining energy poverty. In particular, at political levels, it's important to agree on definitions in order to be able to arrange adequate measures and targeted measures to this. And the phenomenon of energy poverty has shown to be very, very difficult
to put in sort of a box as a definition is. So one of the things that has become very apparent is that the more contextualized, the more we go down to the local level, the more precise we can be in our local or maybe even community level definitions of energy poverty, and the higher we go to national or international level, the definition has to be broader in order to encompass the many, many different situations of vulnerability that is affecting energy poverty. And this leads me to the other gap and the other sort of realization we've seen at authority level in particular, it is the lack of information, the lack of data, which is something we in the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub has been trying to support in both at member state level in the EU and beyond, but also at local level. You'll therefore see that if you go to our website, that we have a dashboard of a series of I think as for the moment it's 21 indicators that can give each of these indicators can give one piece of the very, very big puzzle that shows eventually the picture of energy poverty in a country, as well as for the EU. But at the same time, we have, and coming back to also the understanding of the phenomenon, we are also providing a series of disclaimers on how to read this information, because data can be interpreted in so many ways, and in particular, when we start to combine different sources of and different types of data, the interpretation has to be done very carefully. And there we also have a lot to learn, and the crisis has forced us to have a very steep learning curve here. At local level, where the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub is primarily working, we have, together with a series of municipalities, also developed a set of local indicators that enables municipalities to pick and choose from. I think we're up on something like 56 different indicators that each municipality can pick and choose depending on their specific situation, what indicator makes most sense to follow for them, and then the combination of their set of indicators can then support in both defining their energy poverty, but also setting a baseline and ensuring that the actions developed are targeting exactly, let's say, the weakest spots in the municipalities. This is long-term planning. The crisis hit us very upfront, and we have also seen in the EU that a lot of actions have been done, and that's also where we the financial support scheme provided in Moldova sounds actually quite complex and very well thought through. And we can see that the member states in the EU have also applied various different versions, depending on their different situations, depending on their different history and culture of their provision of energy. There are still differences here and there. And at the same time, also their geographical situations and as well as sort of the differences between north and south. And here again, the municipalities have played a major role, because it might be that our energy crisis is a very technical challenge. But the consequences are social and human, meaning very often the municipalities are those closest to the citizens, those who have the trust to engage with the vulnerable. So whereas we have a global crisis, the consequences are very often dealt with at local level. That's when it's primarily sort of the practical and immediate support. And then, of course, at the same time, as we also heard, also with the overall national subsidy scheme, these are also been applied. But what is, I think, the lesson learned is that we have to up our game when it comes to better understanding, better data and information, and at the end of the day, in order to improve our measures, in order to make the most of our effort. Again, the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub are collecting. I think we have a bit more than 250 different local measures online that is to be seen as inspiration, as well as the understanding that taking action on energy poverty is not something you do on your own. You will see that there's a lot of municipalities that are doing a lot of different things that are actually also very interested in sharing their experiences as well as learning from others, because we are, unfortunately, we do not have such a long history in tackling energy poverty at the broader scale. So everybody is very interested in exchanging. And that's also why I sit here and listen to what is going on and the measures taken in Moldova. So I'd say, regardless of all the challenges I've listed, I think we have actually managed both at national and both at EU national and local levels to take actions in an unprecedented speed. And I think this might be my conclusions here, that we have managed, but of course there's a lot to deal with, and this also comes back to the what has also been mentioned before. The phenomenon of energy poverty is cross-sectorial, and we have to work cross-sectorial, cross-ministerial, cross-municipal departments, cross-directorate generals, in order to tackle the phenomenon in the most efficient way. Because it's clear that engineers have a different view on this as social workers perhaps have, and it's the combined knowledge that leads to the most impactful activities. This is what we've learned for the past years in the Energy Poverty Advisory. Thank you very much for inviting.
Mulțumim mult pentru această intervenție.
Thank you very much for this intervention and for the long-term plans which are set for municipalities at European level and not only. You see, it's been an hour already since we're talking, among other, about vulnerability, about ways to approach citizens, institutions, cooperation between the institutions. Policies that will be developed are very important as well. And we've heard a number of proposals as to the further steps. Now, Mr. Buzu, Minister of Labour and Social Protection, based on the things that we have discussed here, and based on the perspective of the ministry in this sense, what shall we do next in order to reduce vulnerability? To have citizens who are, on one hand, not subject to energy poverty, and on the other hand, take active measures that help them not to lose energy in their homes. What is the perspective of the ministry? Thank you very much. I would like to greet the colleagues once again and thank them for having found time to participate in the second day as well. Yesterday I said that this event is an opportunity to express gratitude. And once again, on behalf of the government, of the citizens of the Republic of Moldova, we have our good friends. We see their flags on top of this banner, and their support was decisive. And I was talking to Marcel, and I said, had there not been full-fledged engagement of the colleagues from the UNDP, we wouldn't have had the system of compensations the way we had it. Our colleagues took a great risk when they worked with us, and we appreciate that. We appreciate this loyalty to the well-being of the citizens of Moldova. And I think the colleagues from the UNDP deserve all our gratitude, all our respect. Once again, thank you, Dumitru and other colleagues. heard here plenty of useful lessons, which we must be aware of, and we must commit to many of them. What should we do next? We want to target better. And once the cold time of the year comes, we would still need to compensate because the prices are still high. And we need to have a structural approach. We are a very poor country with an energy system that is performing at a very low level. And I'm so happy that Moldova finally has a policy and is extremely serious in tackling these three elements: more accessible, more clean, and more fair energy. Before I became member of the Rechan cabinet, we were discussing the deadline for decarbonization in the Republic of Moldova, and there were a number of ambitious targets there. And you see, there were some differences about the specific year. We agreed that we need this leapfrog. And we do have a good plan. We have trustworthy partners, brave partners, I dare say. And we have financial support as well. 2 days ago, the Commission has made the support for the Republic of Moldova public. One of the 5 priorities is related to energy security and the reform of the energy system in the Republic of Moldova. The American colleagues will also provide quite generous support. And I said it yesterday, we have no moral right to waste this opportunity. Another important element for us is related to a much more inclusive approach related to the energy basket. Previously, the system was very much dependent on the energy suppliers. And there was a category of citizens who could not benefit from it because the price of the energy basket was quite high. This year, we're going to integrate this APRA payment, as we call it, in the system of compensations. So those who do not use gas or district heating will also be supported. It is important to continue the dialogue and to empower. I think this is the key word in the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. The department and those who are responsible for communication they are important and they should be more active. The citizens in Moldova, they know that they must save, but we have to empower them. We have to give them skills and instruments that would allow them to change the behavior. So we need to empower them. At the ministry, we did all we could in this sense. We did a lot, actually. And we tried to be very diligent with regard to every action involving our citizens. Yesterday, Corina has said that there were more than 55,000 of complaints, and we treated each and every one of them with maximum dignity and respect. And this is not an exception. This is the standard way of interaction. When you interact with a lot of care and respect, when people do not lose dignity in interaction with you, then the door of trust opens. And that is important. Once we build this trust, the citizens will become the natural partners for us in this rather difficult journey. We will have a transition to a more clean, more accessible, and more safe energy system. In terms of data, we spoke a lot about that. And when I came to the ministry, I've noticed that on one hand we have a shortage of data, and on the other hand, the data which is available is not used when we develop programs, budgets, when we prioritize particular things. Here at the ministry, we must consolidate this. But we also need structural elements. For example, the data about the payment deficit, trade balance, inflation. All these are supplied on a monthly basis by the National Statistics Bureau. Me as a minister, I have to wait for 6 months to understand the rate of poverty in Moldova in the previous year. How on earth am I supposed to do the policies in the social sphere if I do not get the data in due time? So we must make sure that the relevant data are produced in a much more appropriate time so that we are able to use them. The World Bank, the IMF, whenever there is a crisis, they index the GDP by zero, by a particular percentage, and then they try and calculate within how many quarters the GDP will get back to the level before the crisis. We, the ministry, we need to index the poverty rate. It went up, and when we prepare the policies for 2024, we need to understand what is our ambition. Where do we want the poverty rate to be? Because we need to handle the effects of the energy crisis. They are still there. The battle is going on. And just like you have mentioned it, all these efforts are anchored in our wish to integrate in the EU. This once again means that we will be more responsible in this sense as well. And I am quite confident that our small success with a system of compensations, our victory that allowed us to make our energy system more independent, should take us further. And this has shown us that some of the things which were viewed as impossible are actually possible. You can build a system within 4 or 5 months, and that system will be relatively okay. You can diversify the sources of energy within 1 year and a half. You can do something to the institutions which are inefficient and corrupt. You can bring them into 2023. You can make them more modern and more efficient. This is doable, and if this is doable, we will do it. Thank you very much. So, our discussion panel was finalized with the intervention of Mr. Minister Buzul. Now my question is, dear audience, would you like to ask a few questions And then we will conclude. Yes, Mr. Minister. There are actually three aspects. At the Ministry, we have drafted a note about the period of compensations. And there we have shown the contributions of our partners, the number of beneficiaries, their share in the total of beneficiaries. We try to provide compensations by type of energy, by type of supplier, and this information is public. During the time when we were paying compensations, we provided information about the number of complaints and requests every week, as well as the information about the number of them being settled. And we were also making reports about the use of money. It is important for us to be transparent. That's why we were extremely diligent with regard to every law that was used in this sense. Number two, the colleagues from UNDP will make the study related to the program of compensations public. I think this is a good study that will help us improve our efforts. This is one element. And another element, we will try to anonymize the database in the system of compensations. We want to make it available to all researchers, to the World Bank, to the Academy of Science in the Republic of Moldova, because there's quite a bit of useful data there, based on which we can shape various interventions on social protection, on energy consumption, and many other things.
And the third one is that the compensation system showed us that we can modernize other ways of payments in our system, because, for instance, the IT system which manages the social ajutor payment has been developed in 2003. 12, sorry. And that means that what we have developed recently can help us rethink, optimize, and do things much more transparent for other payments, for other components of our system. So the impact of this program will be far greater for our system beyond compensations. Thank you very much. Questions from the audience, please. If no questions from the audience, the last intervention, I would ask the speakers, use two key highlights, two key elements, and tell us where to from here. Where to from here? From all we said today. And we'll start with Mr. Stănculescu. He was the first to speak. Two key elements referring to the future. Well, the time of cheap energy is long gone, or is gone actually, for a number of reasons, and we have to be ready for the future. And the two key elements that I would highlight would be energy efficiency, because you can see what the problem for us, the pain for us is the bill. The bill means the energy. So the price of the energy, but also the quantity. So we have to look at the quantity as well and try and lower it as much as possible. And here, of course, we have energy efficiency projects that we keep talking about these days. And the second highlight is the one related to renewables, because look, we can feel an explosion of the projects related to, solar panels on roofs for residential buildings. So the best path to reduce the quantity of procured energy is to self-produce it, and then renewables. This use of heating pumps, and by doing that, reducing energy consumption in the residential area is the second highlight that we need to underline. Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, sure. Two highlights. What do you? We talked about energy, renewables. We talk about renewables. We talk about increases in prices for energy, etc. Thank you.
Okay, I think two points for me is to build the agility into every new case that we looked in going forward. The real-time agility, and I think that is the innovation and novelty also with the Energy Vulnerability Reduction Fund, that we built in the ability of the system to adjust the real time. And I think it goes back to the question of the speed, which sometimes the policymakers need to make decisions, and the lack of the data and information that they may have at their hands to not go with certainty on those decisions, but with the validity of the assumptions that inform them. I think that's the first one, and the second one, as we are leapfrogging with the technology, not to lose the sight of the people, human behavior, and them being the active participants in the decisions making and joined in the leapfrogging in going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Michael.
So, my 2 points. Doesn't contradict anything that's been said here. It's actually very consistent. My 2 points are, first, energy security, affordability, and clean energy. The overarching solution is have a diversified energy sector. So diversity, as I mentioned, regional integration. I think this renewable energy, I mentioned earlier, the enormous resource potential in Moldova. There's an abundant opportunity for low-cost renewable energy. Renewable energy, despite the myth, is actually, in many cases, lower cost than conventional energy. So I think tapping into that resource is really important from an energy strategy perspective. And then the second point I would make is for clean energy, both creating the environment for private sector investment. So we have public funding. We all here work on the public funding side of it, but there's always a private funding side. And there's a need for both. The enormity of the challenge is huge, and we need to create the investment climate for the private sector to come in for renewable energy as well as for energy efficiency work. So I think there's an enormous opportunity for both. It's creating the policies, the regulations, so that the public's protected, as well as you're incentivizing the private sector to come in. So I think you need diversity and private investment. Thank you.
Mersi. Da? Domnul Spătar și după asta domnul Buzu, da, ca să-i...
I took this question literally. I thought about 2 words, actually. Well, I was thinking about digitization, analysis, etc. But then I think that the 2 words that I would choose are very well known to you. Development, sustainable development. And behind each of these terms, we can put the concepts that we talked about. When we talk about development, I mean digitization, efficiency, energy efficiency, data analysis, decisions, database decisions. We talk about sustainability. I see it because I worked at the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. I look at the solidarity component, social component of sustainability. Reduction of energy vulnerability, reduction of profound poverty in this country, solutions for the vulnerable layers, redistribution of welfare. So if we take into account these two dimensions, the development of the energy sector in the new paradigm, which is more liberal than what we had in Moldova, Mr. Sandulescu was saying that the prices were free-floating, but they're still regulated by Andrei in this country. So they are correlated with the market, but they're not totally free. So in time, we'll get there. But to get there, we need to make sure that this does not affect the poorest ones. Thank you. All right, so online speakers, Mr. Epp Ensen, in 2 words, half a minute.
Minutes, but I mean the distinguished panel has already come up with I think we're up on 10 key points now. So I'll just add very briefly 11 and 12. What I took note of is the fact that everybody in the panel has been talking about the cross-sectoral challenge of energy poverty, and I think also it was mentioned sort of the importance of trust and transparency, as we're dealing with the most vulnerable in society, and so that's crucial. Then key point 2 is the fact that it's an aeroplane we are building while we are flying it. So we have already done a lot, but we still have a good way to go. So let's continue the exchange and learning from each other, because collectively, I think there's a very good pool of knowledge we can tap into.
Și domnul Munteanu, 2 puncte.
Two key highlights. Mr. Munteanu, we asked all the speakers to mention 2 key points for the next period to come. So what do we take from all we talked about here from your perspective, sir? It looks like there is a technical problem. I think I haven't heard you. So first of all, from the point of view of the agency, I would say providing mechanisms and tools which would allow to optimize the cost of energy for the households, for the most vulnerable and those who need help from the state. This mechanism must be based on maximum transparency. The decisions must be made without the subjective interference of the human factor, so that it is possible to increase the confidence between citizens and the state authorities. The second highlight, it's a call to homeowners associations who represent the multi-storied buildings and with whom we shall be working. It is to increase their capacities, to reorganize themselves as it is provided by the legal framework, and to have management bodies which are correctly elected in order to be able to make quick decisions. Because the biggest challenge that I can already see is not about the money to optimize energy consumption in the sector, but the assimilation capacities by homeowners associations. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Mr. Buzu, 2 key elements for the time to come. The problem is so complicated and severe that the only solution is to have that leapfrog, and that we talk about this leapfrogging. Well, yeah, the frog leaping. So we have to make this enormous leap. So this is the only option. And what we've done, what we've been able to do, is makes me confident that we have the capacities, the political will, the support of our friends and partners, so that we are able to pull it through. Thank you. Thank you, sir. And having said that, we are wrapping up this panel, and we are closing the conference, Fighting Energy Poverty in Europe, Challenges, Lessons Learned, Paths to Follow, Moldova's example. So I remind you that this conference was organized by the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection under the aegis of the government of the Republic of Moldova and with the financial support of UNDP. Thank you. Have a beautiful day, everyone.